"Get lost, old man." The words hit harder than the slap that followed. The night air was thick with tension, the kind that crawls under your skin and stays there. The living room lights burned bright, revealing every line, every scar, every wrinkle on Clarence's face. A 70-year-old man with a short grey beard that glimmered beneath the yellow glow. His eyes, tired but steady, stared at his son like a calm ocean facing a raging storm. Across from him, Darius, his 35-year-old son, stood tall and angry, a man too proud for his own good. His face was red with fury, his chest heaving as he shouted, "You've been living off me for years, old man. You think you can sit here doing nothing, eating my food and giving orders like you still run this place?" Clarence said nothing. He just looked at him, the way only a father can, the way that sees through all the noise and into the broken boy still hiding behind the man's anger. "Don't look at me like that." Darius snapped, pacing like a lion in a cage. "You're just a burden now. My friends laugh when they see you sitting here like a king, but you're not a king anymore. You're just pathetic." He snatched the TV remote from the table and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, scattering batteries across the floor. Then, in a burst of rage, he stepped closer and slap. The sound echoed through the house. Clarence didn't flinch. His hand rose slightly to his cheek, his fingers tracing the sting, but his eyes never left his son. "Pack your things," Darius growled. "You're leaving tonight. I don't care where you go. You're not staying here another day." The old man's silence filled the room like thunder waiting to strike. His breathing was slow, his heartbeat calm. There was no shouting, no defense, no pleading, only a long, weary exhale. He looked around the house one last time, the walls still lined with family photos, memories of birthdays, graduations, and Sunday dinners. The smell of home-cooked meals lingered faintly in the air, mixed now with the sour scent of anger. He stepped toward the door, his movements slow, deliberate. Darius followed him, muttering curses under his breath. "Go on, leave. You're nothing but dead weight. I'll finally have peace once you're gone." Clarence turned his head slightly, his voice soft but clear. "Peace doesn't come from pushing people away, son. It comes from keeping what matters close." "Save your lectures," Darius snapped. "You've lost your right to talk about peace." Clarence's lips formed the faintest smile, not of joy but of understanding. He opened the front door. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint hum of the city and the distant barking of dogs. He stepped out, his shoes crunching against the gravel driveway. Behind him the door slammed shut. The lock clicked. He stood there for a moment, alone under the dim streetlight, his shadow stretching long across the ground. His cheek still burned where his son's hand had landed, but inside there was only stillness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old flip phone, scratched, faded, but still working. He looked at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the keypad. His face was unreadable. Then he pressed and held one number. The phone rang once, twice. Then a calm voice answered on the other side. "It's time," Clarence said quietly. A pause. Then the voice replied, "Understood." He hung up. No explanation, no emotion. Just a final glance back at the house that had once been filled with laughter. Through the window he could see Darius pacing, shouting at someone on the phone. Maybe his wife, maybe one of his friends. The lights flickered slightly, and for a fleeting second, Clarence's reflection appeared in the glass. The face of a man who had given everything, and received betrayal in return. He turned and began to walk down the street, his figure disappearing into the darkness step by steady step. Inside the house, Darius laughed bitterly, pouring himself a drink. "Finally free," he muttered, collapsing onto the couch. But behind his laughter, there was something else, a faint unease, a silence that pressed down like weight on his chest. The night grew colder. A single streetlight flickered outside, and somewhere in the shadows, Clarence's calm voice echoed in memory. "Peace doesn't come from pushing people away." He didn't know yet what those words meant. But by morning he would. The first rays of dawn had barely brushed the neighborhood when the consequences of last night's chaos began to unfold. Darius Benton woke to an eerie quiet, the kind that makes a man aware of how fragile control really is. The house was still, the only sound the soft hum of his expensive refrigerator, which seemed suddenly foreign, cold, and lifeless. He rubbed his face, trying to shake the heavy feeling settling in his chest. His hands, normally steady and confident, trembled slightly. Something about last night's events had lodged itself deep in his mind. Not just the slap he gave his father, but the silence that followed. The way Clarence Benton had left without a single word, without panic, without fear. That quiet stillness had felt like a challenge, and Darius, for the first time, felt the weight of his arrogance pressing down on him. He rose and glanced out the front window, expecting to see his father wandering somewhere aimlessly, looking lost, humiliated, broken. But the driveway was empty. The street stretched silent and deserted, bathed in the soft golden light of early morning. For a moment, a ripple of doubt ran through him. Had his father actually left for good? A faint ping interrupted his thoughts. A message on his phone. Darius picked it up instinctively, his fingers shaking. The message came from an unknown number. The screen displayed only a few words. "Check your accounts." Confusion flared into panic. He hurried to his laptop and logged into his bank. His heart skipped. There were numbers missing, vast sums he had always considered untouchable. The accounts he had depended on, the money he flaunted to everyone, the wealth he believed gave him the power to mock and dominate, all vanished. Darius's mind raced. This couldn't be real. No, it can't be, he muttered, scrolling frantically. Every account showed a zero balance. The statements, the transfers, the balance, gone. He slammed the laptop down, the thud echoing through the quiet house. His hands were sweaty, trembling. He tried calling his father, dialing every number he knew, nothing. Every attempt ended in silence, a chilling, deliberate emptiness that gnawed at him. Panic, raw and primal, clawed its way into his chest. The bravado, the pride, the arrogance, they evaporated in an instant. Desperate, Darius raced out the front door, stepping into the crisp morning air, and scanned the street. He expected to see someone else, a stranger perhaps, responsible for this. But all he saw were the familiar signs of normal life. Neighbors walking dogs, cars starting their engines, birds singing softly from trees. Everything looked ordinary. Everything except him. He stumbled down the sidewalk, past the gate, past the mailbox, past the tree where he had once climbed as a boy, under his father's guidance. The memory hit him sudden and sharp. How many times had he argued with this man? How many times had he dismissed advice, belittled wisdom, or thrown insults like knives? How many times had he laughed at the quiet dignity of the one person who had built everything he had? The image of last night's slap returned, burning brighter than any memory he wanted to hold. The force of it had been meaningless to Clarence, but the silent weight, the calm, unbroken gaze, that was what terrified him. And now, without money, without pride, without control, Darius felt the full force of a father's quiet wrath. By the time Darius reached the gate at the edge of the property, he was breathless. His chest heaved, his face pale, eyes wide with fear he could not disguise. There, pinned to the metal gate, was a single note, handwritten in Clarence's familiar, steady handwriting. A son who forgets his father forgets himself. Learn humility before it is too late. The words pierced him like ice water. Every ounce of arrogance and defiance was replaced by raw terror. He looked around wildly, expecting some trick, some cruel joke, some hidden camera. But there was nothing. Just the note, just the silence, just the knowledge that he had been outmaneuvered without a single shout, without a single insult returned. And then a sound caught him. A soft, deliberate click behind him. He spun, and there, standing at the end of the driveway, was Clarence, calm as ever, long grey beard glinting in the morning sun, hands folded behind his back. Not angry, not shouting, just observing. The sheer presence of the man carried the weight of years, of sacrifice, of wisdom Darius could no longer mock. "Dad," Darius whispered, voice breaking. His knees buckled slightly and he sank to the ground. "Please, help me, I don't know what to do." Clarence didn't move immediately. He walked slowly, deliberately, letting each step echo against the driveway. When he finally reached Darius, he leaned down slightly, eyes meeting his son's in silence. No words, no lectures, no scolding. Just calm, measured observation. The silence stretched heavier than any words could ever be. Darius buried his face in his hands, tears streaming down, chest heaving. He had mocked, insulted, and attacked the very man who gave him life. And now, stripped of pride, stripped of wealth, stripped of arrogance, he was reduced to a child. Finally, Clarence spoke. Just a few words, slow, deliberate. "Your life is yours to rebuild, son. Start by learning respect. The lesson wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't immediate. But Darius felt it in every fiber of his being. The fear, the shame, the helplessness, all burned into his memory, leaving a mark that no amount of money, pride, or anger could erase. And as the morning sun climbed higher, bathing the neighborhood in light, the first sounds of realization broke through. Sobs, shallow and desperate, echoing across the driveway. Darius had finally understood. The boy who had slapped his father, who had thrown him out of his home, was now a man kneeling in humility, crying like a child outside the only person who had ever truly mattered. This was only the beginning. The calm father, the quiet call, the unseen power, all of it had led to this moment. And somewhere deep inside, Darius knew he would never forget it. The sun had fully risen, spilling golden light over the quiet neighborhood, but the warmth did nothing to soothe Darius Benton's frayed nerves. He remained on the driveway, head bowed, chest heaving, tears streaking down his face. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to hide, to escape the shame that now clung to him like a second skin. Yet he could not. The presence of Clarence Benton, standing calmly a few steps away, held him in place. Clarence's eyes, steady and unyielding, scanned his son with the patience of decades. He said nothing, allowing silence to work its weight, letting Darius absorb the gravity of his own actions. Each sob, each shiver of fear, each regretful glance at the driveway symbolized lessons Darius had ignored for years. Darius finally lifted his head and glimpsed the empty spaces around him. His father's house, which he had once ruled with arrogance and entitlement, now felt alien. Even the expensive cars in the driveway, the manicured lawn, the facade of wealth no longer mattered. All that mattered was the quiet power of the man he had tried to humiliate. "Dad," Darius whispered again, voice cracking under guilt. He attempted to rise but collapsed back to his knees, overwhelmed. I'm sorry. I didn't realize." Clarence exhaled slowly, the grey of his beard catching the sunlight. His eyes softened slightly, but his posture remained regal, unbroken. "It's not about realizing," he said quietly. "It's about understanding. And you don't understand yet." Darius shivered as the weight of the statement sank in. He looked at the driveway, the note still pinned to the gate fluttering lightly in the morning breeze. He had read it a dozen times already, but the meaning was now fully clear. Every arrogant insult, every careless action, every moment of disrespect had consequences. Consequences he was only beginning to feel. Clarence began walking slowly toward the gate, each step deliberate, measured, like a metronome counting out justice. Darius lowered his head, ashamed, unable to meet his father's gaze but unable to look away. The neighborhood was waking up. A jogger passed by, glancing curiously at the scene. A grown man on his knees, crying uncontrollably, while the elder, silent, calm and unshaken, observed. Yet no one could fully grasp the depth of what had occurred. The decades of sacrifice, the betrayal, and now the quiet, devastating lesson of authority and wisdom. Clarence stopped a few feet from the gate. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone and swiped a screen. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet the impact would ripple through Darius's life. A faint, distant hum of authority echoed. A call that had been placed, a message that had been sent. Within minutes, the systems Darius had trusted would shift. He didn't know it yet. He couldn't. But his confidence, his control, his arrogance, all were fragile illusions ready to crumble. Darius tried to speak again. "Dad, please, I'll do anything. Just, please." His voice was desperate, broken. Clarence's calm presence seemed to grow heavier, more commanding. He didn't rush. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. Silence was his weapon, his message, and it struck harder than any shout could. Time stretched. A car drove slowly past the street. The driver glancing at the unusual sight. A grown man sobbing, kneeling, stripped of pride, while the elder who had built everything observed with quiet dignity. Darius buried his face in his hands, shaking uncontrollably. Each sob shook him to the core. The arrogance, the entitlement, the insults, all were meaningless now. What mattered was survival, humility, and the realization of how completely he had misjudged his father. After what felt like hours, Clarence finally spoke again, his voice low but firm. "I gave you life, Darius. I gave you lessons. I raised you, protected you, and yet you treated me as though I were nothing. This is the beginning of your understanding." Darius's tears flowed freely. Every word, every glance, every silent step of his father burned into his consciousness. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. I understand now. Dad, I'm sorry." Clarence's gaze remained steady. He didn't reach out, he didn't offer comfort. That would have been too easy. The lesson required the full weight of realization, the painful acknowledgement that Darius had lost control over his world, if only for a moment. The distant hum of a vehicle's engine drew Darius's attention. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands, notifications, alerts, and emails, each one a hammer striking his world. Accounts frozen. Transfers cancelled. Credit lines restricted. His power, his pride, his illusion of control, all evaporating. Darius fell forward, resting his forehead against the cold metal of the gate. His body shook. The tears were endless. His cries, desperate and raw, echoed into the morning, piercing the calm of the neighborhood. Clarence remained calm, silent, the quiet smile touching his lips, the only acknowledgement of satisfaction. Not cruel, not gloating, just a quiet satisfaction that justice, long overdue, had arrived. Time moved forward. Yet Darius stayed there, kneeling in the sun, powerless, humbled, and realizing for the first time the full extent of his arrogance. Every insult, every slap, every disrespectful word had led him here. And only then did he understand the depth of a father's quiet power. A soft wind brushed Clarence's long grey beard. He turned slowly, walking away, leaving Darius kneeling in the driveway, crying like a child, completely undone by the silence and wisdom of a man he had spent a lifetime underestimating. It was not the end. It was merely the next chapter, a lesson etched into the memory of Darius, one he would carry forever. The morning sunlight caught on the note pinned to the gate, fluttering gently. Its words, still fresh and sharp, glimmered in the light. A son who forgets his father forgets himself. Learn humility before it is too late. And as the wind carried the words across the driveway, Darius realized something profound. The quietest actions are often the most powerful. By late morning, the street had grown busier, but Darius Benton remained rooted to the spot outside the gate, still trembling, still crying. His pride had evaporated like morning mist, leaving only the raw, exposed reality of a man who had underestimated the quiet strength of his father. Neighbors passed by, some glancing curiously, others shaking their heads. Darius didn't care. He could not. Every glance, every footstep, every whisper from the street felt like a judgment, magnifying his shame. The note, fluttering gently on the gate, had become a symbol of his failure. Its words, simple but unrelenting, gnawed at him. He read them again, and the weight of his arrogance sank deeper into his chest. A son who forgets his father forgets himself. Learn humility before it is too late. It was not just a warning, it was a declaration, a reckoning. Inside the house, Clarence Benton moved with a calm deliberation. His long grey beard caught the sunlight as he poured himself a cup of coffee, slow and measured. He did not need to shout. He did not need to lecture. The storm had been set in motion, and now the world would watch the consequences unfold. He glanced at the clock. 30 minutes had passed since the note was pinned to the gate. Darius was learning painfully what respect and humility truly meant. Meanwhile, Darius's phone began to buzz relentlessly. Notifications of declined transactions, frozen accounts, and calls from concerned associates flooded the screen. His world, the one he had built with entitlement and arrogance, was unraveling. Panic clutched his chest, and he fell to the ground again, burying his face in his hands. He could not understand how his finances, his power, his control had vanished within minutes. "What did you do, Dad?" he whispered, voice trembling. "What did you do?" Clarence's words came softly from the doorway of the driveway, his presence commanding yet gentle. "I did nothing, Darius. The world has a way of balancing itself when arrogance ignores wisdom." Darius looked up, his eyes wide with desperation, and saw his father walking slowly toward him. Each step carried decades of dignity, patience, and experience. The long beard swayed slightly in the morning breeze. His calm demeanor made Darius's fear multiply tenfold. He realized for the first time that his father's strength had never been in muscle, wealth, or control. It had always been in wisdom, foresight, and quiet resolve. Neighbors began to notice. A few lingered at a distance, whispering. One woman stopped her morning jog, covering her mouth in surprise. A young man leaned out of his car window, watching a grown man cry openly on the street, while the father who had been scorned remained serene. The contrast was shocking. The raw humiliation of Darius set against the composed, almost statuesque presence of Clarence. Darius tried to rise, to stand tall, but his knees buckled. He stumbled, grasping at the gate, at the pavement, at anything to steady himself. The world he had taken for granted had crumbled. Every insult, every act of defiance, every careless word spoken to his father had led him here. Clarence stopped a few feet away, his gaze firm yet not angry. You mocked me, Darius. You disrespected your mother, your home, and yourself, and now you must face the consequences. Darius's breaths came in shallow gasps. I'll do anything, Dad. Please, help me. Clarence shook his head slowly. I have helped you all your life. This is no longer about help. This is about learning. Your suffering is a reflection of your choices, nothing more. A faint hum approached from the street. Darius looked up and froze. His heart raced as he saw two uniformed police officers walking toward him. The same calm, methodical father who had left him outside had ensured that consequences would follow swiftly. The note, the accounts, the silent lesson, everything had been orchestrated with precision. The officers stopped a few feet from Darius. One cleared his throat. Sir, we need you to come with us regarding several reports of financial discrepancies tied to your accounts. You've been reported. Darius's knees buckled again. He fell fully to the ground, clutching his head. Dad, what? What did you... Clarence's voice cut through the morning air, soft, calm, yet carrying the full weight of authority. I did nothing but give you a chance to reflect, Darius. You took pride for granted, arrogance for granted, respect for granted. The rest is life correcting itself. The officers looked puzzled, but Darius barely registered their presence. His focus was entirely on the man standing above him, the father who had remained silent, calm, and unshakable even when every instinct screamed for action. The humiliation, the despair, the helplessness, it all crushed him in waves. He realized finally that no amount of shouting, kicking, or rage could ever overcome the quiet power of wisdom. Dignity and foresight. Clarence stepped back slightly, letting the officers take over, allowing Darius to face the consequences fully. There were no threats, no yelling, no dramatics, just the inevitable truth, delivered with subtlety, precision, and patience. And as Darius was guided away, sobbing, pleading, and shaking, the neighborhood fell into silence. Even the birds seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the magnitude of the lesson unfolding in front of them. Clarence watched from a distance. His long grey beard caught the sunlight once more. His eyes were calm, his posture composed. The man who had been called a burden, an old fool, a loser, now had set justice in motion without lifting a hand, without raising his voice. It was not vengeance. It was not cruelty. It was life's balance delivered in the quiet, steady rhythm of a father who had given everything, and asked nothing until the moment the lesson had to be learned. Darius's cries echoed faintly in the morning light. Every sob, every tear, every moment of fear carried the weight of understanding he had refused to grasp until now. And Clarence, silent and unwavering, finally turned and walked back toward his home. There was no satisfaction in malice, only in truth. The boy who had grown arrogant had been humbled, and the father's quiet power had been proven absolute. The afternoon sun climbed higher, painting long shadows across the street, yet Darius Benton remained trapped in his own despair. He was no longer just humiliated. He was utterly powerless. His arrogance, the armor he had built over decades, had shattered into fragments scattered across the driveway, the gate, and the note that had orchestrated his downfall. Neighbors whispered as they walked by. Some stared openly, curiosity mingled with judgment. Darius didn't care. He could not. Every glance, every murmur, felt like another blow, sharper, deeper than the physical ones of last night. The slap, the kick, the insults, all paled in comparison to the cold, calculated justice delivered by his father's silence. Inside the house, Clarence Benton moved with the serene composure of a man who had lived through wars of the heart, battles of pride and storms of betrayal. His long grey beard shimmered faintly in the soft light pouring through the windows. He brewed himself a cup of tea and sipped slowly, each movement deliberate, meditative. He did not watch his son. He did not need to. He knew every beat of the unfolding events. Every moment outside his gate was a lesson, and Clarence had mastered patience over 70 long years. Outside, Darius tried to rise. He gripped the gate, the metal cold and unyielding beneath his fingers, but his strength had abandoned him. He staggered slightly, knees quivering. His phone vibrated again, a torrent of messages, calls, alerts, and notifications, each one a hammer driving the reality home. The banks, the accounts, the assets, and gone, frozen, redirected. Every symbol of control, power, and entitlement he had ever relied on evaporated like mist. "Dad, please, help me. I'll do anything," he choked out, his voice ragged, barely audible over his sobs. Clarence stepped outside slowly, walking down the driveway with a calm, deliberate pace. His eyes, piercing and unshakable, locked onto Darius. The long grey beard, brushed by the wind, gave him a presence that seemed almost larger than life. He stopped a few feet away, silent, letting the moment stretch, letting the young man absorb the consequences fully. "You mocked me, Darius. You ridiculed my age, my wisdom, my very existence. And yet here you are, stripped of pride, stripped of control, stripped of illusions. And still you do not understand the weight of your actions," Clarence said, his voice low but unyielding. Darius fell to the ground again, collapsing in despair. His hands covered his face as tears flowed freely, a torrent of shame, guilt, and fear. He tried to rise, tried to stand tall, but each attempt was met with weakness. His body betrayed him, as though the universe itself conspired to humble him completely. The first car drove slowly past, the driver's eyes drawn to the scene of a man weeping openly in the driveway, while the elder father stood calm, unmoving, commanding respect without a word. A small crowd began to form, neighbors peeking over fences, passers-by stopping for a moment, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Darius's sobs grew louder, more desperate. He could not comprehend how quickly his world had fallen apart, how his arrogance had led him to this place. Every insult, every act of disrespect, every careless word to his father, now returned to him tenfold. He realized fully that the man he had scorned held power far beyond physical strength or wealth, the power of patience, wisdom, and foresight. Clarence took another step forward, hands folded behind his back, eyes unwavering. "You have been given everything, Darius, guidance, love, protection, and you spat on it. Every moment of this life was a gift, and yet you treated it as trivial. The lessons you refused to learn, the respect you neglected to show, now come to claim their price." The sound of approaching footsteps drew Darius's attention. 2 uniformed officers appeared at the edge of the driveway, badges glinting in the sunlight. Darius looked at them, heart pounding, confusion and terror flashing across his face. "Sir, we need you to come with us regarding irregularities with your accounts and allegations of misappropriation," one officer said. Darius's knees buckled again. He clutched the metal gate, chest heaving, tears streaking down his face. "Dad, what? What have you done?" he whispered, voice trembling. Clarence's response was quiet, deliberate, almost gentle. "I did nothing, Darius. Life merely unfolded as it always does. The choices you made, the arrogance you carried, the disrespect you sowed, it has now returned in full measure. This is not vengeance. This is balance." Darius collapsed completely, curling into himself on the driveway. The officers looked puzzled, but even they could sense the gravity of the situation, the raw power of a father's quiet judgment, delivered without malice but with absolute precision. The sun climbed higher, and the heat of the day seemed to mirror the intensity of the lesson. Darius's cries echoed down the street, piercing the air with desperation and regret. Every passerby turned, some in curiosity, others in quiet awe. They could not know the full story, yet even from a distance, the father's calm dominance contrasted sharply with the son's complete unraveling. Clarence's long grey beard glimmered faintly in the sunlight as he watched. He did not gloat. He did not smile with cruelty. He simply stood, a living monument to patience, dignity, and the quiet power of a life lived with integrity. Darius's mind raced, trying to comprehend the chain of events, the note, the frozen accounts, the police intervention, all orchestrated without a single raised voice. He had mocked his father, ridiculed his age, disrespected his wisdom, and now he was undone. Every ounce of pride had evaporated, replaced with shame, terror, and humility, and through it all Clarence remained calm. He had delivered the lesson without raising a hand, without yelling, without dramatics. The balance had been restored, and the son, finally humbled, would never forget the quiet, unyielding authority of the father who had raised him. As Darius was led toward the police vehicle, sobbing, trembling, and pleading, Clarence's eyes followed every step. Not a word was spoken, but every glance carried the full weight of decades of love, sacrifice, and wisdom. The lesson had been learned, painfully, completely, irrevocably. The quiet dominance of Clarence Benton, his long grey beard swaying slightly in the breeze, remained etched into the memory of his son. A father's power, silent and unwavering, had triumphed where anger, wealth, and arrogance had failed. The sun had begun its descent, casting long amber shadows across the neighborhood. Darius Benton sat on the curb outside his father's gate, head bowed, chest heaving, and every ounce of pride stripped from him. The police officers had left, having ensured that the consequences of his arrogance were fully underway. He had nowhere to hide, nowhere to escape. The man who had been a figure of ridicule just hours ago had now orchestrated the ultimate lesson in humility and respect, without a single raised voice. Darius's phone buzzed continuously, a relentless reminder that every corner of his life had been disrupted. His financial empire, built on years of entitlement and arrogance, had crumbled almost instantaneously. Transfers had failed, bank accounts were frozen, credit lines nullified. Every symbol of power he had relied on now mocked him with emptiness. He sank further into the curb, overwhelmed, trembling, and tears streaming freely. Yet above it all, the quiet presence of Clarence Benton loomed like an immovable force. The long grey beard shimmered faintly in the fading sunlight, a silent testament to patience, wisdom, and authority earned over decades. Clarence had walked down the driveway earlier, every step measured, deliberate, carrying with it the weight of years of experience and the unwavering moral code he lived by. "Darius," Clarence said softly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Do you understand now?" Darius shook his head, the words caught in his throat. I never knew, Dad. I didn't understand. I'm so sorry." Clarence's eyes softened slightly, but his posture remained steady. Apologies are meaningless without change. True understanding is shown in action, not words. You have been given the chance to see the consequences of pride, arrogance, and disrespect. This is the reality you chose. The magnitude of the lesson settled over Darius like a heavy fog. The realization that his father's calm, deliberate actions had orchestrated every moment. The note, the frozen accounts, the police intervention hit him with the weight of a sledgehammer. He had been outmaneuvered not by force, not by wealth, not by threats, but by wisdom and foresight. Every neighbor now seemed to notice the spectacle. People paused, whispered, and stared. Yet none could fully comprehend the quiet mastery of Clarence's plan. They only saw a grown man, humbled and reduced, kneeling outside a gate, crying like a child while the father, composed, calm, and unyielding, observed in quiet dignity. Darius tried to stand, but his knees betrayed him. He sank back down onto the curb, overwhelmed by fear, shame, and helplessness. "Dad, please, I'll do anything. I can't live like this." Clarence took a slow step forward, hands clasped behind his back. "What you call living is nothing compared to the understanding you now possess. Humility, respect, patience, and integrity. These are the foundations of life. You have ignored them, mocked them, and now you see what happens when one ignores wisdom." The note on the gate, fluttering lightly in the wind, carried a final sting of truth. A son who forgets his father forgets himself. "Learn humility before it is too late." Darius bent forward, pressing his forehead against the gate, sobbing uncontrollably. Each sob seemed to release the arrogance, the entitlement, and the pride that had clouded his life for decades. The police had come, his accounts had been frozen, and every symbol of control had vanished. Yet the most powerful force was still this quiet, unbroken man standing a few feet away. Clarence approached, slower now, each step deliberate. He did not raise his voice, he did not scold, he did not mock. He simply walked with the calm authority of someone who had already won, who had already seen justice served without malice. Darius, his face streaked with tears, looked up briefly, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "Stand, Darius," Clarence said, voice low but firm. "This is not about punishment. It is about understanding. True strength comes from wisdom and respect, not arrogance or force." Darius struggled to his feet, unsteady, overwhelmed. His hands trembled, his body shook, and his chest heaved. He looked at his father, seeing not just a man, but a lifetime of lessons, patience, and quiet authority embodied in the long grey beard, the calm eyes and the measured movements. Then, the final piece of the lesson became clear. The world outside had watched, and the repercussions would follow him wherever he went. His reputation, built on arrogance and entitlement, had been shattered in front of friends, colleagues, and neighbors. The humiliation was complete, total, and irreversible. Darius sank back to his knees, bowing his head. I understand now, Dad. I will never forget this. I'm sorry, truly." Clarence simply nodded. No words of comfort, no pat on the shoulder, no gestures of forgiveness. The lesson was complete in the silence, in the humility, in the realization of what true respect meant. The poetic justice had been served, and Darius would carry it for the rest of his life. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, the street returned to quiet. The first hints of evening breeze carried the final echo of sobs, fading into the calm that Clarence Benton embodied. His long grey beard glimmered faintly, his eyes serene. No malice, no gloating, only the quiet satisfaction that the balance had been restored. The lesson delivered, and the sun finally humbled. And in that silence, the world understood. True power lies not in shouting, not in wealth, not in dominance, but in patience, wisdom, and the quiet authority of a father who has lived 70 years with dignity.